The National Bureau of Statistics says the unemployment rate in Nigeria increased to 5.3% in Q1 of 2024 from the 5.0% recorded in Q3 of 2023. The Bureau said the unemployment rate was defined as the share of the labor force who were not employed but who were actively searching and were available for work.
According to the report, 84% of Nigeria's working class population is self-employed, based on research from the first quarter of 2024, reflecting a decrease from the 87.3% recorded in Q3 2023. Joining us now is the principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting, Segun Shokwiton. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Olive.
So we want you to help us make sense of these numbers. I think that it goes without saying that we can all understand why there's an increase in the unemployment rate. But I'm seeing the numbers here. Unemployment rate, we're seeing 5.3% unemployment rate, up from 5.0% in Q3 2023. There's the male employment, there's the female employment rate, but let's not go into that. Then there's the self-employment rate. 84% of Nigeria's working class self-employed. So if you can help us interpret what this means, how we arrived here, and what the implication of this is.
Well, first of all, I think that it bears saying. I think Osarige was saying, explaining what, the unemployment numbers are, and how it has been arrived at. And I think you can't have this conversation without taking a quick glance at that. The fact that the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics considers you employed if you work for 1 hour in a week. And I think we need to let that sink in. So before we even talk about the percentage of the population that is self-employed versus, working in salary jobs, you have to understand that the NBS says that you are employed gainfully if you've worked for 1 hour.
And is that not a huge flaw in the definition of employment?
That's the problem.
There was a recalibration done a couple of years ago.
Yes, so it was August last year precisely that the NBS decided to move from defining employment as 20% per week or more 20 hours per week or more to 1 hour per week or more. So with that recalibration and with that redefinition, unemployment figures dropped from 33% that we knew it to be as at that time to 5%. And we all said at that time that, no, this makes no sense. We all know that unemployment in Nigeria is not 5%. You can just simply do an eye test, talk to the youth around you or the people around you, not just youth. Is it true that only 5 people out of 100 Nigerians that are that can work do not have jobs? So that, first of all, needs to be said, and I think that the NBS is doing Nigeria a great disservice because what this does is that it takes the focus off the reality of our job markets, the fact that unemployment is a real problem in this economy. If you are looking at any economy and trying to determine how that economy is performing, you would look at major macroeconomic indicators. You look at inflation, you look at interest rates, you look at exchange rates, you look at unemployment figures. So if your unemployment is saying unemployment is 5%, it means that everything is fine. We really don't have any problem.
Yeah, is this the same metric that is used across the world? Is it a...
Yes, they've used the ILO standard. So some countries decided to go with the new ILO standard. That standard came into operations a few years ago. But you have to understand that most countries that we would like to benchmark ourselves against, the economic structure is different. The volume of informal sector to formal sector, for example, in Nigeria, we're talking about 60% to 40%. In the United States, it's 10% of the economic activity that is resting in the informal sector. Yep. So you cannot define unemployment in Nigeria the same way you define it in the US or in the UK. The other factor to think about is that minimum wage in those places, even if I work for 1 hour in the UK, at least I've got £6. And you can argue that, yes, £6 may not take you through the week, but £6, if you convert that to Naira, we can do the numbers. We're talking about 50,000 Naira or something like that.
Yeah.
So those numbers are disparate. We cannot compare ourselves to those claims. So that bears saying. To come back to this particular survey and what it means, it would potentially suggest that things are getting better in terms of jobs. It would mean that fewer people are self-employed, that more people are getting salary jobs, and that's what we want. one would say. Is that what we want, though? Do we want people as entrepreneurs, or do we want people doing 9 to 5? That's another conversation, because you find that even the United States, the American economy is driven by entrepreneurs. So we will do better if we're able to empower the people in entrepreneurship in Nigeria for them to be more productive than they are. If we fix things like power, if we fix infrastructure, telecommunications, and all of that, so that they can contribute more to the economy as against being in 9 to 5 jobs that may not pay them enough to deal with their cost of living expenses. So that report can be interpreted either way. But I'm sure that people with a political mind would want to say, oh, this is evidence that economic
No, but
policy is
actually,
working.
I mean, I think we might be interpreting it wrong, because it says that the unemployment rate rose to 5.3%.
Sure.
From 5.0%.
Yes.
So doesn't that mean that it's gotten worse?
Well, there are two angles to that report. They spoke about the unemployment rate itself. That went up. And it's important to just bear that in mind. But first of all, for me, I think that if you say unemployment rose from, I can't remember what the figure is.
From 5.0 to 5.3%.
So we moved by 0.3%. That just tells us everything is fine. We're coasting, and I don't think that's true. So that's why I didn't really focus on that. I'm not interested in a number that I personally don't hold as being credible. But the second part of that report talks about the number of people that have transitioned from, being self-employed.
So 87.3% to 84%.
Yes.
So that would mean
that.
So exactly what I wanted to ask you, does that not interpret that a number of small businesses are not able to thrive anymore because of the current economic realities?
And I do know that, I run a consulting firm, and one of the services we provide is recruitment, headhunting services. And we've run a number of interviews in the last couple of weeks where people are saying, I had to abandon. In fact, one particular example was running a logistics business, had bikes with his wife. He's been doing it for 2 years. And then he came for this interview. He wants to be a CFO, because he's an accountant, and he had done a CFO job before he left it to pursue this dream. Now he's back, So we're speaking to him at that interview and say, oh, so what's going to happen if things pick up with your business? Won't you abandon this job you're interviewing for and all of that? So there are a lot of people like that who are leaving their businesses and going into paid employment because the businesses are not doing well as a result of the economic realities.
And I really thank you for sharing that analogy, because that would give me a framework for the next question that I want to answer. You run a number of interviews for firms. I think I would like you to share with us what the current realities are regarding employers of labor being able to match up their salary offerings with the current realities. But we'll have you answer that question when we come back from this break. Welcome back to Breakfast Central. We're still looking at the report by the NBS concerning unemployment rates in Nigeria. And we're joined by the principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting, Mr. Shokwiton. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before we went on the break, I was asking you about hiring new employees. You talked about how your organization has done a number of interviews in the past few weeks. Does the offering that the employers make, does it match the current reality?
No, they don't. The sad reality is that the employers themselves are just finding a way to survive. They're finding ways to survive. Things have been very tough for everybody. The economy is reeling, basically. Exchange rate devaluation and very high inflation is putting people in difficult positions. So what you find is that the employers are offering what they can, and the employees that are in the job market are accepting what they have to, rather than nothing. So it's a terrible situation to be in, and I think that the reality of that will be that productivity will suffer, because what you would have is, if an employee is, doing a job that he feels is inadequately compensated for, in fact, that he knows is inadequately compensated for because that compensation is actually unable to match his cost of living requirements, he will find ways to augment that income. And he's expected to dedicate a full 9 hours per day, 40-hour week. What's the number? Yeah, 40 hours per week, to that job. He can't. You know, so he's got to hustle, he's got to have side gigs, and some of them would have to have multiple side gigs just to match up with their current living expenses realities, you know. So it's a bad place to be as an economy because everybody loses. The employer is going to lose, and the employee is losing as well.
I want us to go back to the ILO metric that you mentioned earlier. If we weren't using that ILO metric, you know, what would our unemployment rate be? And how, you know, maybe even dangerous is it, you know, that the government sees its unemployment rate at just 5.3%, which, like you said earlier, I mean, it's not bad.
Exactly. You know, so if you are the Minister of Labor and Productivity, for example, in Nigeria, you give yourself a pat in the back, you know, because we're doing better than some G20 economies in terms of unemployment. Unemployment rates in places like France and the UK is trending at around 5%, you know, roughly, some 6%. So we're matching up with those economies. What's the problem? Hey, what crisis? You say, crisis, what crisis? You know, so, and I think that's the problem. So if we didn't have that recalibration, today, unemployment will probably be about 31%. Now, that would be saying that a third of our employable population is out of jobs. And then if you then do underemployment, which was also recalibrated, we'll be talking about 60% of the employable population being underemployed, which means that they are earning, they're working for hours far less than they're available to work for, you know. Unfortunately, we have told ourselves this lie officially, and what that simply means for the policymaker is that they look to other places, you know, for problems to solve. Unemployment is not a problem in Nigeria. That's what this means for a policymaker, and that's a big problem, you know, because if you see it as a crisis and you see it as, then you start asking yourselves, hey, wait, we need to improve the job figures in Nigeria. What policy measures can we put in place to achieve that? What kind of incentives do we want to give employers of labor, for example, to encourage them to employ more people? Do we want to give them some sort of tax breaks if they hit some sort of threshold over the number of people they're employing or what their wage bill is, you know, and all of that? Those are the kind of things that they do in other economies, you know. But if we say that we're trending at 5%, then everything is fine. We don't need to think too much.
So then what then is the way out? If you say that policymakers will, based off these reports, and think that we don't have a crisis in the unemployment sector, but that's not the reality of Nigerians. Yep. And we can't base our findings on any other statistics except the one provided by the NBS. Absolutely. So what is the way out? Is it to go back to the NBS and tell them to, you know, look through their metrics again and give different figures? Or is there really no way out of this? Well,
I mean, I think that the NBS can have a rethink. Maybe if there's any sort, we can ask the National Assembly to weigh in on this and compel the NBS to take another look at this. Majority, well, let me not say majority, many industry experts and labor-related organizations have rejected this recalibration. And I think it's important to note that, you know, a lot of organizations that play in that sector have said, no, this new methodology is not correct and needs to be addressed. It's been a year and there hasn't been any, you know, response from the NBS. They've moved on. So I think that maybe if the National Assembly, the relevant committees, for example, can invite the NBS to come explain why they have done this and whether they do not see the dangers and, you know, if they don't think that this should be addressed.
I mean, it's hard to just, how do you have unemployment at 5.3%, but have the highest poverty rates in the region and maybe even in the world?
Absolutely.
You know, it's just difficult to put those two together, you know, and it's to me, it's very dishonest. And I think I saw that, I think it was Atedo Peterside, you know, react to it a couple of, you know, maybe a year ago or so, you know, saying that it just wasn't making any sense, you know, to have poverty rising, but unemployment reducing, you know, it's not adding up.
And then maybe the minister, exactly, has, the Minister of Labour and Unemployment probably also has some questions
Labour and Unemployment?
Yeah, Labour and Unemployment. At this rate, it is what it is really. But the Minister of Labour and Employment has a number of questions, Nkeruka Onyejocha, has a number of questions to answer. You've talked about the House of Assembly and maybe the National Assembly needing to, you know, having to look into this. But we're hoping that maybe the minister, what can the minister do about this really?
Well, I mean, the minister will be happy about this. She's going to say to herself that I'm doing well, you know, so she's not going to want anything done about this, you know, and I don't want to infer any political connotations to this, but it bears remembering that this was changed in August 2023, which was just a couple of months after the new administration came on board. So was that a coincidence? Was this something that maybe the MBS had been considering even before the change of, power happened? Conjecture, I don't know, but definitely the minister will be happy with this. She would not want this changed, which is why I didn't talk about her and I talked about the National Assembly, because they report to the people supposedly. So they need to come in. There's something you said, Rosarige, that I think we need to emphasize for people to understand. You cannot have poverty prevalence as high as it is in Nigeria and say that your unemployment numbers are good. They don't go hand in hand. If poverty is this high, people are unemployed. That's one of the reasons that they're poor. So there's a direct conflict in those two numbers, and the two numbers come from the same agency.
And I'm wondering what the new minimum wage, what impact the new minimum wage will have on employment and the numbers that we're seeing so far. But this still is a conversation that has to continue, and we thank you very much for joining us. And we hope we can have more conversations like this in the near future. Of course, I'm sure it will be a big conversation tomorrow, October 1st.
Yeah,
it will be a big conversation tomorrow.